you better be careful with 7 years of plenty, like Joseph in Egypt, if you are going to survive the 7 years of drought. So similarly, you are alive during good time. Instead of being proud, treat people well. And when you end up in crisis, the credit balance in your relationship with people will come through for you as they come to help you during your time of crisis. But today we go to 1 Samuel chapter 30, just so that you see the same thing. And remember, our series is on how God prepared young David to become the great king he later became. And we are going through a period of 14 years from the time he is anointed to the time he finally becomes king. Just checking what are the things God took him through. Of course, we saw that, first of all, he made him a shepherd boy. The father took him to the field as a shepherd boy, and he learned how to fight the bears and the lions and how to look after his sheep, how to be committed to his work. Not in leading people, but in leading sheep. And we have learned that every experience God gives you is adding towards what he wants you to be in life. And so last week we were dealing with the crisis finally happens, and he is at a crossroad and how God comes through. However, today is a continuation that the crisis did not end up there. When he was now told to go back to the to where he was living, he went to discover that the whole place and all the property and all the children and all the wives were actually taken. There was nothing to see. And so he was in a new crisis, from one crisis to another crisis. And the lesson we learned today is that God is with you through any and every crisis if you have taken him to be your Lord and Savior as a leader. And it's very important because you go through one crisis, you think you have gone through, you'll be other crisis. You need God all the time. And I think that will be something that we need to have at the back of our mind, even as we think about our lives. I don't know what crisis you are going through currently yourself, but isn't it good to know that whatever the crisis you are going through, God is going to be with you, and he is going to help you to serve him despite the crisis. You know, when a crisis comes, God can either prevent you from getting into it, because he is capable of preventing you from getting into the crisis. But sometimes he does a bigger miracle by allowing you to get in the crisis and then get you out of it. Obviously, that's a bigger miracle than stopping you entering into it. But you see, whichever alternative God chooses, either to allow you into the crisis or to allow your group, the one you are leading, into a crisis, or to prevent you it. Either case, remember God is with you. I have an experience of the coup attempt of 1982. I was a young man, and on the Saturday of July 31st, 1982, I had attended the wedding of one of my former university mates who was wedding that day. So in the evening, we come back to Nairobi and sleep. Of course, we have had a busy day. At night, I hear some sounds like blasts, and I wake up my wife. What is that noise? I said, oh, don't you know this is about Diwali time? The Asians, I was living in South B, and there were a lot of Asians. The Asians normally do those kind of things. The moment I heard it was a Diwali, wow, I now slept very well. But turned out the shootings were were to do with the army and the army taking over the country. But when I woke up in the morning, one of my friends who didn't have a car was at the gate asking me to help him to go to buy gas that day because there were visitors coming to his house and they ran out of gas. So I just prepared myself, jumped into the car, and we went to his place, picked the cylinder, and we were going to the shopping center. Only to go to the shopping center and find that the place is totally silent, nothing moving. I asked myself, these Asians, why are they asleep at this time? And I think it was now after 8. We decided to move from South B. We went to South C. Only to find again the shops were all closed and it was so quiet. So we decided to go to Nairobi West. Again, we went to find no shop is opened. One person looking at us said, "Don't you understand?" He said, "What?" "No, this shop, they are not opening." I told my friend, "Don't worry now. I was working for Shell, so I knew where we can get gas. So I told him, let's not bother with these people. Let's go to town where we are sure to get gas." And so we entered Langata Road to go towards Nyayo Stadium. And only to discover the road was very clear. When we got near the roundabout, Lusaka Road roundabout, where Langata Road begins, we found some people on the middle of the road, kind of squatting. And I said, surely, people drink this early. And the guy I was with was my best man, so he had a lot of stories. So he said, people drink that early, this early Sunday morning. Why would they be drunk? It turned out they were not drunk because as we got near the roundabout, we found the Air Force people with guns pointed to these people who were squatting. And so we also were forced out of our cars and we squatted exactly looking like the drunk people that we had said they were. And we asking the other people, what is it? They said, don't you know the Air Force has taken over the country? Wow. That's when he heard what it was all about. But at some time, 2 of the Air Force soldiers came to us and said, back to your car. You are driving us to Langata. So we had to turn round and start driving backwards to Langata. But as we were going past Madaraka, it turned out that the army had decided not to support the Air Force. And they were coming from the Langata Army barracks to come to fight the Air Force. We were there for court because as we are coming, the army was shooting, not at anything, but just to frighten people out. So even before anybody told me to stop, or in the middle of the road, just parallel to Madaraka Estate, I just stopped. By the time I'm looking, the Air Force guys have already dropped out of the vehicle and are crawling on the tarmac. I and my doctor friend also dropped and started crawling. We left the car in the middle of the road and crawled into Nairobi West. And we went looking for a place where we could hide. And we knew somebody, a friend. So the first one did not open for us. We knew another one. We went and we stayed there. So now we could listen to the radio and we knew the fighting was going on. In the afternoon, after the army had the land army had conquered the Air Force or removed them out of town, they started now announcing on the radio that people who left their cars in the middle of the road should do that. But when he tried to go near where we had left the car, the army people would point guns at us. So we go back. It was around 4:05 towards 4:30 or 5 o'clock when finally they beckoned us. It says, young men, do you want to die? Why do you keep coming? I said, that car over there is my car. So he said, how can you prove it? Because the trouble is you don't carry your logbook in your pocket. I said, but I have the key. By grace of God, when I left the car, I had removed the car keys. I can't remember how. God must have just helped me. So I had the keys. I said, try. When I was about to drive, I was told to go. So I took the car out of the road, went and parked it in my friend's house, since I didn't know how safe it was to drive with the army all over. And then the next thing was to try to walk back. When we now looked at the car, it had blood. It means one of the soldiers, most likely, had been shot. Because they were just shooting all over as he tried. Because what they had tried was, as we were driving, they were opened the window and had put out their hands to show that they are the army people. Because at that time they still thought the army was with them. Now, do you see then, God could have prevented me from getting into trouble, but he allowed me into it. And despite shooting and blood in my car, God had literally rescued me out of it. Many people died during that coup attempt, and I was where I could easily have died. But the Lord protected. None of the bullets touched me or the doctor. In other words, God could have prevented, but he chose not to prevent. He allowed me to see a bigger miracle. Where you know, that's the first time I saw that is when they are shooting, it's fire. You are seeing fire emitting in front of you. And they were not aiming necessarily at me, they were shooting all over, clearing the wide road with bullets to frighten everybody out of the road. But the Lord was able to protect me. 40 years later, because it became 40 years in August, 40 years later, I'm here to tell the story. May the Lord give you the knowledge that however wise you are, you can never be wise enough to deal and predict every crisis. I've been emphasizing to you the importance of being proactive, the importance of preparing. But let it be clear, only God knows the future clearly. And that's why to fall off from the grace of God, to start as a Christian, then somewhere as you become a leader, you start operating on your own. No wonder talking about Galatians, Paul was saying, oh, Galatians, who has bewitched you? You started in the spirit, you want to end up in the flesh. You need God in every instance. Just look at 1 Samuel chapter 30 verse 1. David and his men reached Ziklag on the third day. Now the Amalekites had raided the Negev and Ziklag. They had attacked Ziklag and burned it, and had taken captive the women and everyone else in it, both young and old. They killed none of them, but carried them off as they went on their way. See the crisis they have gone into? They have just been rescued out of one crisis. There did not be another. Go home, tired, waiting to rest. There's no village, your houses are burned, nothing has actually remained. After the solution of possibility of killing his own people, which was a crisis, he now goes into loss of all he ever owned. This David boy and his army. My friend, if you start thinking that way, I'm coming from this crisis to this crisis to this crisis, you end up totally immobilized. Learn not to count your troubles, because they'll stop your brain working. And I'm sure if you read some of the Psalms, there are times David thinks about all the things that have gone wrong in his life. There are two ways of looking at what has gone wrong in your life. You see, the fact that you are still alive today, after all the things that have gone wrong, maybe your father died, maybe you failed an exam, here you are, an adult. Instead of looking at counting what has gone wrong, why can't you count the miracle? Instead of thinking, wow, how did I end up with the coup attempt? Can you see how God rescued you? Count how many times the Lord has rescued you. Because that is what will now make you, even now I'll trust you. In this new crisis, I'll trust you. But the devil does not like us to see what God did. He wants us to count what things went wrong in our history. Instead of seeing the what God has done. I still remember trying to talk to a neighbor's son who had been carjacked. And of course, very traumatizing. They dropped him in the middle of nowhere after going round. And so as I visited him, Of course, he's traumatized. And I was telling him, can you think how many people have been carjacked and killed? You are carjacked. You are giving me the story. Here you are alive. Can't you see the miracle God has done? So instead of thinking, wow, God, why did you allow me into this trouble? Think, God, how loving are you? You rescued me out of this trouble. My friend, you need to be ready for trouble, even in doubles. But then you need to know the God of miracles, even in doubles, that He's able to help you. So never allow yourself to see, oh, I came from this trouble, into this trouble, into this trouble. See, God helped me out of this trouble, and that trouble, and that trouble. Therefore, that God is also able to help me in the current trouble. Verse 3 says, when David and his men reached Ziklag, they found it destroyed by fire, and their wives and sons and daughters taken captive. So verse 4 says, so David and his men wept aloud until they had no strength left to weep. David's 2 wives had been captured, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. You know, weeping is justified. If you have lost a loved one, crying is okay. It's a justified response to trouble. But how you weep matters. How long you weep matters. Because when weeping, you really can't start tackling the crisis you are in. I can mobilize you. So whereas mourning is okay, mourning for too long may be a sign that you don't trust in God. Whereas crying may be okay, crying for too long may mean you think you are in it alone. You don't recognize God is with you. You know, in the case of David, the Bible is telling us, so David and his men wept aloud until they had no strength left to weep. At that point, they have no strength even to think. So when you are in the crisis which you are subject today, please remember you are not alone. God is with you in the crisis. So weep. But how you weep matters. Verse 6 says, David was greatly distressed because the men were talking of stoning him. Each one was bitter in spirit because of his sons and daughters. He is moving from one problem to the loss of all he owned. Now he's a new problem. His friends hold him responsible for their problems. They are not seeing that he himself is in trouble. They are thinking, look at this leader of ours. He has put us in, let's stone him. You know, and that can be quite a problem. People always look for a scapegoat, even when they are a part of the problem. They don't see that there is nothing they suggested and David refused when they were leaving. Maybe they should have left some men behind to guard the village. But they didn't. Nobody suggested, and David refused. But now, when we are in trouble, we tend to remove ourselves and look for somebody to blame. The blame game does not help you to come out of crisis. If they kill David, how will that bring back their wives and children? So as a leader, you need to be careful about scapegoating. Think about how can we sort out this. Longer term, after you're out of the trouble, you can start thinking what really happened. But at the time of the crisis, it's not important to find out who was responsible, how can we blame him. No, think, how can we come out of this crisis? So scapegoating is not right. But please note, it's the level of trust that will spare you from stoning by your own friends. Because somebody will say, but wait a minute, that can't be David. David cannot have wanted us to lose our children and our family. But if David is already the suspect, he'll be killed. So back to our lesson last week. Good days are the ones that will rescue you out of bad days. But in this case, may you learn that your friends can become your enemy. I've written a book on friendship, and I say the definition of a friend the definition of an enemy is a former friend. If somebody has never known you, he cannot become your enemy. Enemies are people who have had a contact with you, association with you, they are disappointed with you, so they become your enemies. So it's important how you relate with the people. Don't allow them to become your enemies. Create trust, create fairness, and they'll be with you even at the time of crisis. So what do you do when you have lost everything, and instead of these people understanding you are in the same trouble together, in their crying, they want to stone you? David tells us the answer to it. But David found strength in the Lord his God. When you have lost all your friends, lost all your family, you are totally on your own, they are talking of killing you in a crisis as a leader, and people want to dump you, and you have been their leader, the only way out is to find strength in the Lord. Because as soon as you find strength in the Lord, you will start being able to think. Because you are not now traumatized. You are able to think and think straight. 1 Peter 5:7 says, cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. In other words, your alternative of struggling with your anxiety or throwing it into God's hands. Please, in the time of crisis, remember who God really is and that he is on your side. Even if your family, everybody has turned against you. Your bosses, your subordinates, everybody has turned against you. Remember, you can cast this crisis into God's hands because, number one, he is sovereign, omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent. He is there with you. Number two, he is on your side. He wants to help you. You are not on your own. That's what will lift you out of the crisis. And sure enough, David was able to think. Look at verse 7. Then David said to Abiathar the priest, the son of Ahimelech, bring me the ephod. Abiathar brought it to him, and David inquired of the Lord, shall I pursue this raiding party? Will I overtake them? Pursue them, he answered. You will certainly overtake them and succeed in the rescue. You see, earlier they were just crying, talking of killing him. But once he found strength in the Lord, he is able to think straight. And at that point, what he comes to his mind is, God is with me. Let me seek his direction. Seek God's direction on how to respond to the crisis, in the middle of the crisis. These are what we call ejaculatory prayers. There's no time to go to Catalonia for a prayer retreat. No, you pray right in the middle of the crisis. And you may not even close your eyes, but you talk to God and cry to him for help. And God gave direction. Instead of just crying, gather your people together, start running after the people who have taken your wives and children and property. Verse 9, David and the 600 men with him came to the Besor valley, where some stayed behind. 200 of them were too exhausted to cross the valley, but David and the other 400 continued the pursuit. David was so wise that he understood people. So when a third of the army says we are unable to go, remember they came from a long journey. They have been crying, they are traumatized. So some people simply, if he went with them, they would cause his downfall. So he said, okay, you stay here. And they went with the 400. Please know your team, and so do not push them beyond their limit. There are people you can keep adding work and they'll cope. The others who are not at the same level. So, and all of them are needed for winning the battle. You require these ones who can go further than point A, and you this one who can go to point B, but all of them are actually needed. And so you need in your team to understand your team, especially during a crisis, so that you know who you can give extra duty and who you cannot. Verse 11, they found an Egyptian in a field and brought him to David. And I think that's very important. This Egyptian is a slave, and he was abandoned by his master Amalekite. The people who had raided the town where David and his men lived were Amalekites. So they abandoned this Egyptian slave. And you know, the hand of God is certainly the one that was helping them. Because by leaving this guy behind, abandoning him, the hand of God is the one that was helping. The hand of God will use what looks natural to sort you out. The finding of a slave in the middle of nowhere is what finally gave them victory. So that's why it's important to pray. You do what he is telling you to do, but even in the middle of it, you require God's help. So now this slave says, if you're not going to kill me, I'll show you the way. And sure enough, he actually does that. Verse 15, David asked him, can you lead me down to this raiding party? He answered, swear to me before God that you will not kill me or hand me over to my master, and I'll take you down to them. You know, this guy is sick and slave, but the weakest part, if not ignored, will bring you solution. You could easily say, that's a slave, let's leave him. But David knew everybody matters. Can see, it's a very important lesson in leadership. Don't ignore anybody. Don't ignore a messenger. He may be the one that will actually help you in winning the battle. Verse 16. He led David down, and there they were, scattered over the countryside. And verse 17, David fought them from dusk until evening of the next day. And none of them got away except 400 young men who rode off on camels and fled. Because they were there rejoicing, they have so much with many slaves. Because now the families of these Jews were slaves. They were rejoicing, they were not for them. So they fought them and killed them. God will use you to bring the solution. So be willing to fight. In other words, the fact that you are praying does not mean you don't need to take action. God was leading, and you can see clearly God was leading. But finally, the 400 men had to engage and fight. Verse 18, David recovered everything the Amalekites had taken, including his 2 wives. Nothing was missing, young or old, boy or girl, plunder or anything else they had taken. David brought everything back. He took all the flocks and herds, everything. Can you see? It is true he had lost. But with God's insurance policy, God is able to return them. In the case of Job, he lost everything. The Bible at the end of the book of Job says he got double. Everything. If he had 100 camels, he got 200 camels. Isn't it good to have that insurance policy? Not from Britain, but from God himself. David got everything back because he was insured by God. That's why we need to find our insurance in God. You know, then David came to the 200 men who had been too exhausted to follow him, who were left behind at the base of valley. People say, no. These are useless people. They were left behind. David tells them, no, brothers, you must not do that with what the Lord has given us. Everybody will share. They had come with us. It's only they got tired. We do not start dividing up, saying who got, who doesn't. The team must remain united. And you must appreciate everybody in the team. Give dignity to every task, and that will be encouraged teamwork. So the people that remain behind, always, they're also doing an important task. Let everybody be rewarded. Verse 26, when David reached Ziklag, he sent home some of the plunder to the elders of Judah who were his friends. Now they are coming rejoicing. Not only have they returned their property, they have also taken the Amalekites' property. So they really are swimming in plunder. What do you do with it? Share your success, and that will build your network. You know, he is hoping one day to become king. So he takes all these property and gives to elders of various villages in Judah. Verse 31 is saying, other places where he and his men had roamed. All the people that had helped them when they were running around and needed help, he gave them something. Generosity will create a network for you. Again, good days will help the difficult days. Thank you very much. Meeting is back to William.
Thank you, Ng'ang'a. for sharing